Hello.
No, hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Martin, just your message. Are we waiting on anything or anyone to start?
Yeah, I was just about to say we're still waiting for Lee, but I might as well get us kicked off in the meantime. So, hello everyone, welcome to the secondary meeting for the GraphQL specification working group this month. By being here, we've all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, the code of conduct, and we all recognize that meetings are recorded, published to YouTube, and that we use LLM or AI summary tools against these meetings as well. We'll start with a quick introduction of attendees. We'll do that in the order that we are in the agenda, but I'll start anyway. Hi, everyone. I'm Benji. Mark.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark from Yelp.
Hello, Martin from Apollo.
I think
Can hear you, Stefan.
Working. While Stephen sorts out his audio, Benoit?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Benoit from Apollo.
Hi, Rob from First Dibs.
Fall over to laptop microphone. Hi, I'm Steven of Netflix.
Hi, Stephen. This is one of the main reasons that we do the introductions, I think, is to make sure that our AV is working. So good. I'm glad that caught an issue. Okay, awesome. We do now have an AI note taker, which is great, but AI also isn't necessarily brilliant at capturing all of the technical content that we discuss. So if you can help by contributing to the notes document for, especially for anything that you think that the AI is not going to capture well, that would be particularly useful. So please do contribute there. And over to Lee to review the agenda. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks, Benji. Sorry for joining a couple minutes late, folks. We've got a decent handful of interesting things to dig into. We'll see how much of our time we consume here. So quick overview of our agenda. Mark, we get to kind of pick up where we left off with schema coordinates. Excited to talk about that. We've got some discussion on specified definitions as a new appendix section, the descriptions on executable definitions, the editorial review for execution result, and a long list of interesting RFCs from Stephen and Benji, which I'm excited to see how far through all of those we get to go. I'm going to assume that we've got everything on the agenda that folks want to talk about, but in case that we don't, just shout it out and we'll add it to the end of this list. And yeah, since we got a lot of busy stuff, let's just dig straight into it. Mark, I'll hand things over to you to talk about progress on schema coordinates. Oh, sorry, Benji,
just
you
a
got something.
second. Yeah, just housekeeping. I should have added this to the agenda. Sorry, I forgot. I have added a new RFC status, which represents oh gosh, GraphQL WG. So I've opened an issue to discuss this on the working group repo, but I've introduced a superseded RFC. So it's another form of RFCX. So RFCX is closed, but it's meant to generally represent that we're not going to be revisiting this. We've decided that we don't want it. But actually, in a lot of cases, we've had an RFC that we've raised to do a thing, and it's become stale and out of date, and we've just opened a new one. So the old one was not wrong. We've not rejected it. We just have replaced it with a more up-to-date version. So I've introduced that, and I've gone back through and relabeled a few things that we closed previously with that label.
Cool.
Also, just FYI, I've updated the RFC tracker that I'm maintaining at the moment that I hope to move over to the foundation at some point soon. So that's got some new features. It's a bit more accurate now. I've also added the little rocket emoji. So if you've got the if your spec RFC is tagged with next stage, then it now gets the little rocket emoji and gets moved to the top of the list, so we know which ones to look at first. So yeah, some nice features there. Anyway, do carry on.
Very cool. All right. With that said, Mark, floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So schema coordinates, we picked up, or we left off last time. There was some, yeah, there was some discussion around the separator for, oh my gosh,
Right.
it was so long ago. Anyway, the separator for enums, right?
Yeah, we were gonna do the double colon for enums.
Right. So anyway, so yeah, so I've kind of gone with the majority feedback and reverted back to the dot separator for all the things apart from arguments. And so, yeah, I think the spec as it exists now represents the majority opinion. And yeah, I'm happy with it as well. The implementation has been updated. As far as I know, all of the feedback has been addressed. I did leave a comment in the Discord channel about kind of like what I think would be some nice to haves, maybe like a clarification in the spec, but I don't know that any of that's blocking. Maybe you can kind of, enlighten me there, but as far as I'm concerned, like I'm happy with it. So yeah, what do we think? What do we think, gang?
Nice. For what it's worth, I did remember why we had discussed blocking the meta fields, not allowing meta fields. And it was because schema coordinates was supposed to point to something inside your schema, and meta fields by definition are never part of a schema. So that was the rationale.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the flip side of that coin is you could literally have __ type name in a query and might want to reference that, which
Correct.
the meta field.
Which is why, yeah, I'm happy to not have it be disallowed, but that for posterity. Last meeting I told you I couldn't remember why we added that restriction, and that was I remembered.
Yeah, and
but I
there's
agree.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there was also an implementation quirk that someone brought up, which was if we do allow meta fields, then there's like the virtual field, which Benji posted like a minimal repro where you kind of get into like this circular thing where like food dot underscore type name triple equals bar dot, bar dot under type name. Anyway, so we fixed with just like a clarification in the spec to say that all non-meta field schema elements can be uniquely referred to by a schema coordinate, which kind of solves that problem. I feel like maybe an assertion in the implementation could sort of reinforce that, but again, I don't know that that's blocking. It's super edge case. You'd have to be like a real nerd to kind of run into this. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of that's it. I think from me. Are there any
Nice.
standing concerns or questions, or what would be like the next step to, moving forward?
We probably want to do an editorial scan through the change itself. This is also like, as far as holding a high bar for inclusion, this one is a little bit easier because it's not on the critical path for either schema construction or operation construction and execution. So, obviously we don't want to like ship it and backtrack it. That would be unfortunate. But at this point, it's been a long time that we've been tinkering on this. And thank you for getting my agent PR up and running in an emergible state. Yeah, I think probably the only thing that's holding us from a very obvious path forward is just like making sure that that pull request is going to land. Where it seems like the last kind of phase is the meta type or the meta fields and meta types are a little bit weird. And as long as we have a clear path on what the appropriate behavior is going to be, then I think we're in great shape.
Sorry about that inconveniently timed FedEx drop off there. I had to sign for that package. I'll be honest with you, I caught maybe the last like 5 seconds of that, which was making sure it gets into a shippable state.
I'll repeat the important part, which is basically our final criteria is that the code is available. Like if the code is available, then we're good to be approved. And oftentimes we'll say that's true when the PR is like merging. And the only thing that is causing me to say like today might not be the day to put this all the way to approved is just noticing that the PR is in a final state where we're kind of deciding which path to take for the behavior of what it means for meta fields.
So the PR itself, like I didn't make an implementation change with regards meta fields. So that's kind of something to understand today, what that implementation change would look like. If, we wanted an assertion, if that was blocking merging, then that I could see making sense. So I can, figure that out. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. Like I would hate for there to be some like landmine in the, very last piece that we just like missed.
Okay, so I can try and take care of that. Martin said it would be cool to have this on the July release. Obviously, maintain a high bar of quality, yada yada yada. Do you think that's like realistic at this point still?
I think so. Benji, I know you've been in reviewing this one as well. I'm curious what you make of the schema coordinate resolution for meta field stuff.
There is like one or two really, I mean, I'm in favor, but there's one or two really minor things that you might want to think about, Lee. One is, and maybe you've done this already. One is when you implemented this originally, you gave each schema entity a method that would give you its schema coordinate. And we need that method on, for example, dunder type name. And what should that yield? So at the moment, I think we're proposing like triangular brackets meta dot dunder type name or something like that. Is that right, Mark?
There are no. No, I mean that's not something in the implementation right now. I think maybe we
Sorry,
need to
I
revisit that.
misspoke. Not the dunder type name. That is still just uses the correct object type. It was the dunder schema and dunder type fields.
Dunder schema and dunder type. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not following.
So those are meta fields. So the issue that we have is in GraphQL.js, they exist globally, independent of your schema. So your schema might have a root query type called query or called root or called root query, whatever. So that field, the dunder schema field, doesn't know what its schema coordinate should be. Like it can't print it currently, I think.
Or maybe, okay, I'll rephrase this in a different way. So you can think about, if you think about everything in the GraphQL schema being objects, there's a type, like an object type, that's a thing, and then that has a list of fields, and each of those are unique things. And so for schema coordinates, like the whole thesis of the schema coordinate is given this like tidy little bit of text that describes which object in your whole schema you should go reach in and yield back up. Um, and the weird thing about meta fields is, first of all, they are not part of your schema. You know, dunder type name is not a field on your type. It is a a thing that gets evaluated during execution where we say, we found a dunder field. We have a special case for how to handle that, which is not the same as going to a schema. Um, and so just as like a matter of an implementation detail in GraphQL.js, there is in fact an object that describes the dunder type name field, but like a global singleton, right? There's only one of them. Its behavior is identical always. There isn't like an instance for every single type. Um, and Benji, I was going back to the PR and reading your write-up on this and your suggested options, which is okay. I'll just restate Benji's just partly for my own benefit and understanding them. Forbid all meta fields from schema coordinates as I originally proposed. I think we've all agreed that that's not the right thing to do. That's too it hurts a real use case, which is that you want to describe something in a query using this syntax, which I think is reasonable. You want to forbid just the specific meta fields, which I think is just a variant of forbidding meta fields. So I don't think we should do that. Create new instances of this global field instance so that this idea of, if you did, whatever dot dunder type name, it would in fact resolve to the correct thing. That also seems probably wrong. Like it's actually probably the right thing that it's global. And then this last option is basically just like throw an error. So, and he says I'm leaning towards option 4. I think I agree.
Yeah. So I mean that's what I made that spec change. The bit that I was confused about earlier was the triangle brackets thing. Sorry. Did you give an example of that somewhere, Benji, that I missed?
That might be me misremembering, but I have a vague feeling that like at one point that method that exists, like get schema coordinate, would yield a schema coordinate value. But of course, it doesn't know what the type name it's on, so it needed a placeholder for that.
You know what? I think I also remember what you're talking about now. So it would be like triangle brackets meta, triangle brackets dot. Okay.
Exactly that, yeah.
Yeah, no, I do remember what you're talking about now. So the implementation change specifically would not be that well, okay, so this is this is a specific point I want to understand. Either we like throw an error when you try and do that, or we yield triangle bracket meta triangle bracket dot, under schema. Like those are two different options, right?
I think the main
Yeah.
issue here is just that that method exists, like the get schema coordinate method. It's like a helpful method, but it's also not required for what we generally want to do with schema coordinates. Like we generally are given a schema coordinate and then you go and find it rather than you've found a thing and then you want to know what its schema coordinate is, though it does make sense both ways.
I would actually just kind of jump in there and say, for what we've been using schema coordinates for, having the GraphQL library in whatever language you're using, having a like built-in function to get the schema coordinate for the currently executing resolver is actually quite useful to have, and having that be exposed as part of GraphQL JS and intern Apollo, like on Strawberry or something, that would actually be like genuinely useful. So I would kind of like to keep the get schema coordinate function and have that exposed on like the info objects or something.
Yeah. So given that's the case, what should these global things yield? Should they result in an error? Should they return null? Or should they return this special meta string with the triangular brackets in it?
Okay.
The meta string, I don't think we should do the meta string because I think the meta string is weird. Because nothing in the spec, actually the spec does not describe an algorithm to get a schema coordinate. Is that right? I'm pretty sure it doesn't. I think this is like an implementation detail that if in the code base you have one of these objects and for convenience you want to create a schema coordinate out of it, we give you a method to do that. But I'm pretty sure what we've specified is only the resolving side, right?
So, I mean, could we not like resolve it to the actual like root query type at runtime?
There is one dunder type name field instance across the entire schema. So if you're looking at that dunder type name, you can't tell what type it was accessed on.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize the time in this meeting. Working as that's maybe I'll catch up back with you in the Discord.
Let's just be like super concrete about the problem we want to solve though, because I want to make sure that you're making progress. And I don't want us to spin in circles on a thing that doesn't ultimately matter that much. So, okay. Two problems. One is what should the specification of this behavior be? Second problem is GraphQL JS has a bunch of GraphQL JS specific stuff going on, and what's the right behavior there? On the schema side, or sorry, on the specification side, we have first, should you be able to write a schema coordinate for a meta field? If the answer is no, which I think we've agreed is not quite what we want, but if the answer is no, then it's like we're just kind of done because the how to resolve a schema coordinate just works. But if we say that you can write a schema coordinate to a meta field, my type name dot double underscore type name or something like that, or the schema double underscore schema. Yeah, foo dot type name is the most interesting case. That's one that actually aligns with like real usefulness. What does it mean to do the resolving a schema coordinate step on this? Because resolving a schema coordinate should return back a thing in your schema, which by definition, foo dot double underscore type name is not part of your schema. It doesn't have anything to return. you might just leave it undefined or not like unstated, but say we need some special case that for this meta fields that says if this is a meta field, then uh we gotta have something else that we return from what is resolved. Um, which in GraphQL.js, like in GraphQL.js, it is a implementation detail that we model meta fields as literal field objects. It just makes the like execution behavior slightly easier to build. But there's no reason why that we had to do it that way. Like you could imagine in the execute function that happens in GraphQL.js, as you're reading through and you see the field name that I'm about to execute is called double underscore type name, that it doesn't look up some type object. It just like literally just does the thing right there in line. That would have been a completely valid implementation, which means if we said, oh, in that case, you should return whatever your global definition of a meta field is, like that leaks implementation detail. That's not something that you could specify. Um, so I think like if GraphQL.js had resolve schema coordinate return null in that case, like technically that would be spec aligned, but is that what you want? So I think there's like a range of things that could be provided here. One of them could be if this is a meta field, it's kind of up to each implementation detail to decide what to do, which is maybe weird. The other is to say it resolving a meta field by definition returns nothing because it's a meta field. It doesn't exist in your schema. And that's just what it means to resolve that schema coordinate. It's still a valid schema coordinate. You can write it and you can look at it and you say, obviously that points to a meta field. But if you say, hey, now get that thing out of my schema that refers to, it of course means that it's going to return back nothing. And then like, do we want to do a special case in GraphQL.js? Like, does that actually harm the helpfulness of that method? Um, and then the other one on the GraphQL.js side is we have this little convenience function for get a schema, given a field definition, get its schema coordinate. And I think it's totally fine for that to throw an error or probably throw an error if you try to call it on one of our meta field definitions.
Um,
And I'm
behavior.
happy to, I'll rewrite that up because I know I just rambled for a bit. Rewrite that up in the pull request thread.
Okay, so one of the compelling options, I guess, for both Lee and Benji, and I'm happy to sign on to this too, is to say behavior for meta fields is undefined. Or do we want to like try and do a little better than that?
So the original pull request for this basically said meta fields are not a valid schema coordinate. If we were to say that, is that something that we can lift in a later version of the spec? Because if so, I would like to get schema coordinates out, excluding meta fields, and then deal with meta fields later in a separate like follow-up thing. Because honestly, schema coordinates have been in use for like 10 years. Like, let's get them specified and defined. And being able to reference under type name is useful, but it's not as useful as being able to reference user.name, you know.
What about non-dunder type name meta fields are not allowed, but like a specific inclusion for underscore type name?
Underscore type name is the more complex one. The other ones are easier to solve.
Oh damn. Okay.
And for what it's worth, the code base is full of little special cases for the dunder type name and dunder type um, meta fields. So it's not weird if we have a, weird special case for meta fields. Meta fields are weird.
I think I like Lee's idea of just basically returning null if it's meta field, or like not returning anything if it's a meta field. And that would also mean that if you access the toSchema coordinate property method of a meta field in GraphQL.js, then that should throw an error. Say this is a meta field, it doesn't have a schema. Doesn't have a schema coordinate. Yeah, we don't allow resolving of its schema coordinate. There we go.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask like one more potentially very dumb question here, but I'm playing catch up a little bit here, if I'm honest. But the problem of like there is only one singleton instance of __ type name as a virtual object, and it doesn't know what it's on. Right, it's kind of shared across the whole of GraphQL.js, and so when you want to call resolve, they're like dot get schema coordinate function on that singleton shared object, it doesn't know what to return because it doesn't have that context. If that's like the big, because I'm still trying to like wrap my head around like why that's a problem. Is that like an implementation problem? Could you not like thread that context through to the object as like an argument or something, or async local storage context, whatever it's called? Like, is that just like an implementation detail problem that even though it's like a singleton thing, it doesn't know what to return for foo._ type name? Like, could we not make it
I
know
think
what to return foo._
I
type
think the
name?
main thing that Lee's trying to get across is that the meta fields don't exist. In GraphQL.js, they happen to exist as singletons because that's how it's implemented. In other languages, they literally just might not even exist. They might just have special handler code in the relevant sections of your code base. So they don't exist. They're a thing you can query, but that's because they are meta fields. And the reason they're called meta fields is because they don't exist. That's what the meta is. So resolving them kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah, by exist, we mean like they don't exist in the context of your schema. Like your schema is a big collection of object types and fields and arguments, etc. And those are all like stuff you could point to. And that grouping just like doesn't contain metafields. Like metafields exists as like a concept. Like it has rules for how they work. Yeah, what is existence exactly? But that's why I mean actually like it's why I'm like not worried about the get schema coordinate side as much because like okay, going the opposite direction is that's like a totally implementation detail level thing. Oh, and why the interesting question is very specifically this resolving a schema coordinate section. Um, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. Like you can imagine we've got that like little section in there that's okay, let field name be the value of the second part of this schema coordinate. Return the field of type named field name if it exists. Cool. Are we done? Because if we just said like then we're done, then that means if you resolve a my type name dot double underscore type or my type dot double underscore type name, resolving it gives you back nothing, which maybe that's fine. Maybe that's reasonable behavior. But I think it's probably reasonable that someone would ask like, wait, is that what should happen? Should we say something about what metafields are supposed to do here? And if that's the case, then we just like stick a little note that says, by the way, you can have something dot you can have a schema coordinate that refers to a meta field like type dot double underscore type name. It's syntactically valid. It might make sense as you're writing, error text. However, it does not resolve to a field in your schema.
Yeah, I think I finally get it, and I think that makes the most sense. Like in GraphQL.js, kind of like, okay, fine, like the resolution function might actually return you like the virtual thing, but in like other languages where it does not exist, there's nothing to return. We're specking out the resolve function, like given a thing in an AST object, return the actual schema elements, but that schema element might not exist in another language. So I totally get it, but so then saying it's valid to write because that could just be in a document or whatever, like the bit of the spec where we say you can write a schema coordinate, this is what it refers to, fine, like that can still exist, but then the spec implementation for the resolve schema coordinate function might just be undefined, like depending on if the language has those virtual fields or not. It's syntactically valid, but semantically null. Yeah. And so the question is explicitly saying no implementation allows resolving a meta field versus just saying, maybe you can, maybe you can't, it's undefined. Yeah, okay, I totally get it now. I like the idea of what Lee just said, which is like theoretically the spec is valid as is. It's kind of like a little bit undefined. So yeah, I think I have enough context to kind of talk in
Cool.
a lot more now.
And it's like admittedly quirky. And I think to Benji's point, like, does this give us some room to introduce something else in the future? I think it does. Like, it's the spec refers to like things in a kind of an object-oriented programming kind of way, in a sense that you might imagine that there are like it describes a meta field as a thing with properties on it, in which case it's also reasonable to say if the schema coordinate very specifically is something dot double underscore type name, then what you should refer back is like the special thing. But we could like do that as a follow-up in the future if we decide that our decision now is weird and wrong. I was also just trying to figure out where in this spec we describe execution behavior of hitting a meta field, and I can't find it. So maybe that's also a thing that we are just like doing poorly. Cool. I think like barring that one, how to meta fields. Remember 2 weeks ago when you're like, why did you have that weird meta field exclusion? And I was like, I don't remember. And now here we are being like, oh man, these things are weird. So I think probably we just need like a note that's like, by the way, resolving a meta field doesn't do anything. And then the GraphQL JS side should just like mirror that behavior. And then I think we solve the problem. That's probably the right move. Okay, that's the next step. Hopefully that's a relatively easy turnaround and we keep making progress. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
Okay, Appendix C. Specify definitions.
Yep.
Martin, this is yours.
Something I presented last month, I think, and a bunch of time before. So this is the idea is to group all the specified type system definition in a single appendix at the end of the specification. This is something I've been missing as an implementer. It's easy to get everything in one place, so you can just copy paste. Also has some other value like adding descriptions to all the fields which are not present all the time. So it would get a place where we would have like the canonical descriptions for the in scalar, for an example, or something like this. So we now have this appendix C. This is in the pull request. Last time we talked, I think the status was we wanted this to be automated through GraphQL JS so that it doesn't become too much of a maintenance burden. Fun fact, I didn't find a GraphQL JS version that matches exactly the current specification. Like either both of them have one-off and deprecated input values, but one-off is not merged yet, or maybe it is now, but it wasn't last time I checked. Well, anyways, there's still a tiny bit amount of manual intervention that needs to be done. But it's mostly automatic. And the other thing was about sorting. Benji raised a good point about how do you sort the fields in your schema. The spec text uses, I think, chronological order. The new additions are put last at the bottom of the type. I see Benji frowning. I think this is the spec. Yeah? Like one of his. No, not
it
one
doesn't
of.
use chronological. It just uses the order that you specify them in. It just maintains the order.
How is that not?
Well, I mean, if you
Chronological.
add one in the middle as the last thing you do, it will keep it in the middle.
Yes, but the newer one, like specified by, they are at the end. Like I
Oh,
think
like
that
you mean in the introspection schema, you mean?
no, in the spec text, if you go to section 4, oh yes, introspection section, the specified by URL, which is a relatively recent addition, is at the bottom of the list. And same for the is repeatable directive. So I think at some point, I don't know why, but we decided to put additions at the end of the list. Maybe it's not true for everything. I don't know.
The intention of the ordering is to order by, okay, a couple things. It does coincidentally end up being roughly ordered by chronology, but it's intended to be ordered by dependency, importance, and complexity. So the idea is if you read top to bottom, you should not encounter a concept that requires understanding a concept that comes later in the document, right? Like you introduce the prerequisites before you get to the later, more complicated things. And then you have importance where like you should encounter the concepts that are most important to understand how things work first. And then all things being equal, you should encounter simpler concepts before you encounter complicated concepts. Um, and this is admittedly a very fuzzy way to order things. And so it's not as like clean and and practical as just alphabetically sorting them or chronologically sorting them. But it has the intent is to get to this thing where you can like start with by reading from the top and read from the top down and never get to a spot where you're like, I am confused and I don't understand how this works because you've picked up these concepts along the way, which is why the very first scalar type you encounter is a string. It's the most common one. The one after that you get is numbers, and integers are simpler than floats, so you get integers first. And then you get Booleans because they're slightly less common than numbers and strings, but they're still really important. And then IDs are weird, and so they're at the very end. And then similarly for the directives, it's like skip and include are there at the top, and then deprecated is right after that, and specified by is below that. And it's I think coincidental that they end up being a little bit chronologically sorted because if it was so important to be critical to GraphQL, it probably would have been in at the beginning of the spec. And we tend to be finding the like edge cases and continued things that we need, and they tend to be incrementally more esoteric, and so they go towards the bottom. So I think it's just coincidental that they end up being chronologically sorted.
There was a tiny argument that specified by could be seen as some documentation about a Scala, and so putting it closer to description and name would make sense. I don't know. I don't really mind whichever order we choose. The fact is, it's different in the spec and in GraphQL.js. So
Yeah. Yep.
I'm fine either way. I think the current pull request modifies the spec text to match GraphQL.js, but I'm fine the other way around as well.
Oh, the other thing that that the spec text is describing that actually we probably do want to update GraphQL.js to do is all things being equal, we list scalars before we list or fields that are scalars before we list fields that are long lists of things. And that's just like a old school REST API design property where like as you're doing debugging and you look at the big JavaScript blob, you kind of want all your scalar values up front before you have something that's like going to be a big long list of data structures so that you don't visually miss the tiny little scalar that's in the middle. Um, it's like not the most important thing in the world, but it's just like a very minor nice to have. And it's part of the reason why it's like name, description, specified by are all kind of tightly packed, and then fields and input fields come after that. You could maybe make an argument that input fields should go before fields since they are come before, but usually you've got one or the other, not both, so it doesn't really matter. That's just sort of like a minor thing. The directive repeatability has a similar property, right? It's a scalar, and so it sits above locations and arguments, which is why it does that. It's also like the other one that we'll look at is you want the order that fields are listed in introspection to mirror the syntax. So if the syntax is that you write the name and it's repeatable before you write the locations, then you would do it that way, which I actually don't know that we've gotten that exactly right, but that's the other place where we would do that kind of thing. So my suggestion, I'm happy with this pull request. I think this is really good. My suggestion would be just remove the changes to introspection, be temporarily satisfied with it being slightly in a different order, um, but like keep it as an active thread of work to go do minor reordering changes on GraphQL.js, come back, update the latest version of GraphQL.js to pull from, rerun the script, get them to be slightly reordered. It doesn't bother me that we have like some temporary state where the appendix has them in a slightly different order than they are listed in the spec if we know that we are continuing to work towards fixing that.
Works for me.
Cool.
I think we should add these changes in, honestly. Just like you said, Lee, bring in like the is repeatable up to a higher position so that it's above the list of things would be beneficial. And same for specified by URL. Like these are both just string and Boolean scalars. They should be above the lists of stuff. So I think moving them now would make sense. And then we're basically done then.
Yeah, that would also be great. I mean, this is pulling alpha 8. If we want to stick that in and make it alpha 9, then you can just make it happen and that'll be it. Done is good. Done is good. Okay. And basically as soon as those small changes are done, we'll merge it. Nice work. This is super cool.
So changes are alpha 9 and that's it? What's the other one?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's just like make sure that this, as the pull request to the spec, is only changing the addition of Appendix C and is not also changing any of the other sections. Which is if we
Which is,
ship alpha 9, it's like we've just minorly reordered things to solve that bug, then it's just done. We're just done.
I think Benji was suggesting that we would still update the section for introspection because it makes sense.
Yeah,
Oh, am I reading this backwards?
I think you're reading it backwards, Lee, yeah.
Oh shit. Okay, my bad. Okay. Yeah, I need more coffee. You guys are 100% right. I was describing the rationale that exactly lines up with the change that you made. And so, yeah, this is just straight up good. Okay,
Cool.
I'm just gonna merge this. Okay, sorry for the confusion. That was me somehow reading a diff backwards. Okay, cool. I'm gonna get this one merged in a hot sec. I fixed one little linty issue, and then I'm gonna hit the merge button. Um, Very nice work. Okay, let's talk about descriptions on executable definitions.
All right, so there's been some iteration on this over the last weeks. So you can see some of the commentary in GitHub. And so the spec edits, I think, are ready to go. The GraphQL JS implementation is basically there. I'm working on Benji added a few points of feedback last week that I'm about to push a PR to address, but besides that, that is also ready to ship. So I ask, are we ready to move this to RFC 3?
Did we not have a label on this before?
So this links to Ivan's previous
Okay.
one, and that highlights I guess the Benji's new RFC
That one had the RFC. Okay, I was like, wait, what? How's this PR
supersedes.
not labeled?
Yeah,
Just gonna-
so it supersedes because it was on Ivan's branch that I couldn't edit, so I made a new branch.
Nice.
On that topic, I'm gonna go back and mark Ivan's one as superseded. Lee, as much for you as anyone else, with the superseded RFC status, I'm leaving the RFC2 status as well. So it gained RFC2 before it was superseded, essentially. So it keeps both labels.
Cool.
Okay, good. Cool.
As long as, yeah. I think we will trace the lineage of these things appropriately. Whatever you're doing to make our tooling work, I support. Okay, so just to recap this change, because
Yeah, so the brief recap of the change is now we can put descriptions on GraphQL queries as well. It's and it includes on the on a GraphQL operation, but also
yeah.
on a fragment, and also on um variables within the operation. But in short, within executable documents, it's
I,
is a new place for description.
I shared your PR, Stephen, with some folks at Apollo working on MCP. They were very excited by it. For
Awesome.
anything AI related, it helps a lot.
Okay, this one is like stage 2.5 at this point. I think there's like one more editorial thing that I think we can just like hot fix right now and call this
Yep.
done. Um, which is, as I'm like reading through the spec text change, you added a section or a subsection to the language section to define the description as a string value, and then there's a bunch of text here. I think that creates two definitions for description because we have one also in section 3.
Yeah. What would you propose? I since we have kind of the like the executable document and the SDL, these two different sections. Like I tried to keep the two different description blobs kind of like not overly redundant. But
Mostly, I want to make sure that we don't, because like when you set those definitions, it creates like hashtag links. And so if you ever find and click the word description, which one is it going to go to? And I don't think we want to define like two separate, like I think there should just be
yeah.
a description. Like we don't need to have different definitions of description. It's
Hmm.
fine for that section, what is it, 3.2 type system descriptions. We could let that one continue to exist. It probably just needs to be like slightly reworded. First of all, to like it doesn't need now the preamble of why documentation is important because we already had like now we've basically upgraded descriptions from being part of the type system to descriptions being part of the language. So we're just
Okay.
essentially like step one is we've moved the bulk of the section of descriptions up into from section 3 into section 2.
Hmm.
And I think that's most of what you did is like you copied and pasted the important parts of that. So we should just like remove those parts from section 3.
Hmm.
And but then if we want to leave section 3.2, maybe retitle it slightly to be like type system descriptions, and then and use that. Like we can keep, there's an example there that shows what it looks like for a query document, or sorry, a schema document to be well documented. And have a little bit of text there that's like, documentation is a first class concept of defining your GraphQL type system. Which a little bit of that might be slightly repeated from what we said in the section where we introduced descriptions overall. But that would allow us to just like re-emphasize the point that type system, like one descriptions really shine when it comes to describing your type system.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In GraphQL language in general, but especially in the type system.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, if it's important, say it twice. And so we're saying it twice. But so anyway, I think that's like, if you literally went through and did like a first pass of what you think an appropriate dedupe of that is, and then like pinged me today, then we would make this stage 3.
Awesome. And so the title of that section, like the markdown title, so that needs to change.
I think the markdown, the place where it's like description : string value, the place
Yeah.
where we've literally defined the grammar,
Yeah.
that's the most important one, is there should only be one place where we define the grammar.
I see. Okay. So
Which
should we just remove that line?
from the section 3 one, yeah. Like basically
okay.
we've moved the definition of it up from section 3 to section 2.
Okay.
And
Got it.
section 2 being called descriptions is great. And I think like the section 3.2, maybe we call like type system descriptions.
Type system descriptions, yeah.
Or like that, probably like that is something like that is probably great.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And
So
then
rename the title, remove the definition, and dedupe the text.
yeah, and it's probably also worthwhile to like be a little more holistic about descriptions in section 2. Like your version in section 2 exclusively describes how they would behave in the context of a query.
Yeah.
And it's probably fine to allude up at that top section that like everything in GraphQL is described, both elements of your queries and more importantly, everything in your schema and type system.
So we'll make section 2, we'll make that the main descriptions.
That's the place where we introduce the concept of
and then in section 3.2, just a reduced thing that just kind of reemphasizes and maybe some specifics, examples for type system.
Yep.
Cool. So okay, yeah. So I'll make those changes, and then I'll also submit or I'll commit the GraphQL JS feedback revision as well.
Sweet.
Cool. It's getting close. Okay, so now then I want to briefly touch on I wonder if we can jump to the other RFC that I mentioned here, which is deprecation of objects. And so this is an RFC that hasn't changed much in recently, but there has been interest, and so the main things that need to be done are on the implementation, I think. And so what I wanted to touch on is the idea itself. What is our level of confidence that this is the right thing and that we actually want this? And basically, if we have high confidence there, then I'll go ahead and like brush off the JS implementation, get it where it needs to be. There was also GraphQL Java implementation submitted, which is cool.
I think long term, pretty much everything in the schema should be deprecatable, right? Everything wants to change over time. So this makes a sensible way to do it. The key thing, and I think the unwritten and should maybe become written rule of the spec should be that if you remove everything that is deprecated from a schema, from a valid schema, then the resulting schema should still be valid. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past is making it so that, for example, the dunder schema might start to accept a parameter to say include or exclude deprecated. At the moment, we do it as arguments on, sorry, it has an argument on arguments and on fields. And the problem with that is you must repeat the same Boolean everywhere, because if you use different Booleans in each position, you can get an end schema that is not valid, right? So it is essentially a global. Either you have the deprecated stuff or you don't. Either way, it should be valid.
Okay, so we need to make sure this passes that it's still valid if you subtract an object that has a deprecated on it.
So yeah, it needs that. And also, I'm concerned that we probably shouldn't add more deprecated arguments to things in introspection, because that was probably a mistake. And maybe we should introduce a better way of a top level way of accessing the schema with all the deprecated things removed.
Yeah, because we of course started with just like one kind of thing that could be deprecated, and it made sense that we stuck the deprecation argument in introspection close to that thing. But now as more and more things are deprecatable, like Benji, I think the way that you described this is the best way to think about this from a semantics point of view, which is you have your whole schema, and then you have the subset of your schema, which is not deprecated, and both of those must be valid schema. The whole schema, of course, is a valid schema, and then the subset of non-deprecated schema is also a valid schema. And so from that perspective, like it actually would make more sense to put the include deprecated at the dunder schema field level, right? Like you do dunder schema arg include deprecated, and then that means what you are getting is either one of the two of those options. You are now observing the full schema or with including the deprecated stuff, or you are observing the subset schema. And then obviously all the other fields inside would like behave as expected based on, which thing you're looking at. That we could deprecate, include deprecated. Oh man, that's great. I'm gonna put that on a birthday cake. The yeah, exactly. Benji typed in chat, I think what the right thing is to do.
To clarify, are we talking about just the include deprecated, and we would still have like is deprecated on everything? Is that correct?
Yeah, because you still want to know, like, if you have done
Yeah.
include deprecated, then you want to know, like, which elements are part of that outside ring of things that got excluded. And and then that really like implies that you've this is part of the reason why we decided not to do deprecation of object types earlier, is because there were so many places that you could reference them, and it meant that all of the places that you could reference them also had to have a way to deprecate them, because like what would it mean to have a type listed in a union and then you deprecate the object type? Like now you need to have the ability to deprecate members in unions. And that one is weirder because of how we represent those in the introspection schema. So
the intent of this was really to enable that, actually. Like basically the idea is if like so if you're not including deprecated in introspection, and if you remove an object that was deprecated, then it should disappear from any unions it was in. So it's basically a like a way the intent was originally to enable removing something from unions. Because otherwise it's a lot easier to get rid of objects, but it's particularly when they're part of an abstract type that it's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, man, more fuel on the fire for why union types were probably a mistake. But I definitely agree with that that goal, making sure that we have the ability to maintain union types over time seems like the right thing to do. It also has implications on what it means for that. Like deprecating a field means if you query this field, you will get back something that at least matches the schema. But we don't want you to query it anymore. But union types are interesting because they describe like the set of things that you should expect to receive back. And it's like a whole other thing, which is interesting of like how do you give people guidance on what is supposed to happen there? Like obviously, if you said, this thing can return back, a cat, a dog, or a burglar, and burglar is deprecated, by the way, and then the back end returns a burglar, like should GraphQL JS throw and say like you're not allowed to return that type, it's deprecated?
Yeah,
Because
actually.
if a client had like built with they'd removed all their deprecated instances, they're built on a now non-deprecated schema, then they just like got back a thing that they didn't expect. Um, so anyway, maybe there's in general, I think we should be able to just deprecate anything, but in the intermediate term, I'm curious if there's other paths that allow us to do cleanup here. Like is removing a field from a union a breaking change? It's a dangerous change, but is it breaking?
Yes, it would make previous operations that reference that in a named fragment or an unnamed fragment for that matter invalid.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's the place where it needs to be deprecated because you need to be able to say, hey, this existing query that got sent my way that um, has that thing that would have been not pass validation needs to continue to pass validation. However, the server now guarantees that it will no longer return a type of a deprecated member of a union.
The same is true for interface membership as well, because you can do a fragment on the interface for any type that implements it.
And so that there are in the issue, there are some other alternatives mentioned, and there's some discussion there. Alternatives to like basically like directly putting a directive like on a union to say, okay, we're taking this member out. And similarly on an interface to say like this no longer implements this interface. Personally, I think that just implementing the object is the most elegant way to unimplement an abstract type,
I think
but
that's right.
there are other options. Um, and so then I was just reflecting on what you're saying about like, should GraphQL JS like accept when we try to return, a deprecated type? I don't think we need to, because a client should be able to accept a type name of an abstract on an abstract type that it doesn't recognize, because the server might have since added a new type, and so even if the client isn't spreading on that type, it should be able to accept unknown type names. So that should be okay. It would probably be weird to return it if it's deprecated, but it shouldn't break anything. But the main intent here is you want new clients to stop spreading on types that you're trying to get rid of, and you want their tooling to to stop them from doing that.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
So,
Cool. Okay.
yeah,
Do
so
we have
briefly as a
everything we
next
need for
step,
this one?
I think that it sounds like we do like, yeah, like we like where it's headed. So maybe fleshing out the implementations would actually be a good way to get at the just the finer details of validation and stuff. And then we could bring it back up again. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the right thing.
Cool. And then as far as RFC level, does given the current state of this solution, like how confident we are on this direction?
I think it's marked as RFC1 right now, which I think appropriately aligns to the current state, which is we as an inner crew have agreed that this is a problem that we want to see solved. So it's not RFC0, it's RFC1. And then whether we're on the right track or not is just like less tracked in the RFC, and we just hope that we're on the right path. And there's probably like a handful of things to get right before we decide that we are, on a final path where there's a draft, and then we're just like tweaking the details. Seems like we're not quite draft yet. There's like major stuff around, like how exactly is this supposed to work for unions? We've got a handful of options. What does this change about introspection? We should crack all those problems before we decide that this is at the draft level. But it seems like the progress here is quite good. So I think we'll be able to get there.
Sounds good.
And hopefully you'll be able to go find some of the handful of folks who've been active in this thread in the past and get them re-engaged. So get a bunch of people happily churning away. Um, cool. Okay, Rob, sorry we skipped over your editorial change. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, no problem. It's this is the change I brought to the last meeting or two. I think it was just waiting on Yuli for an approval and review. So just a reminder.
Okay.
Yeah, it unblocks a lot of stuff for incremental delivery, and I think it would be good to get in the next spec cut, because it cleans up some stuff that we've been talking about in the response section.
Cool. Yeah, this one is this one's basically done. I'm gonna merge this one now. I reserve the right to go through and tweak a copy, but that's always true. So, but this is an awesome change. Thanks for getting all the building blocks peeled out.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool, that one's in. Benji, you have a handful of various RFCs at different stages, and we've
Yeah,
got 10 to 15 minutes left.
let's
So
hammer
I'll
through
let
them.
you decide which ones you want to pick up and dig
Okay,
into.
cool. I've put them. I put the first three as all as 2 minutes each. So let's just do them. First one
Okay.
is do not exclude schema keyword if schema has description. This was RFC2. Lee, you said the requirement was that it needs a GraphQL.js test. There is a GraphQL.js test. It has been merged. GraphQL.js already implements this behavior. Can we RFC3 it?
I'm taking a little quick look. Do not exclude schema keyword. Oh, okay. I'm remembering. We wanted to make sure that the rules that you describe in the spec text were exactly the rules that would happen in GraphQL.js.
Yes.
That way we didn't accidentally create a spec misalignment.
And also that we just don't drop a description if you've added one.
That seems important.
Yeah. Which
I'm
is what the
curious if
spec
it did
text
it
tells you
just
to do
work right out
currently.
of the gates, or did you have to do anything
Oh, no.
to
It's
fix
been
it?
implemented in GraphQL.js all along. I think the people who implemented it were like, well, obviously you don't want to throw it away if it's got a description. And just no one thought to carry that fix back to the spec.
Hell yeah. Um, okay, doing the thing. Marking that one as accepted. Let me see if there's any. Adds an example, clarifies description.
Feel free to merge it later. Like just having the RFC3 labels happy are good for me.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to like read through and see if there's anything that warrants me doing a editorial reread. And this one does not have any of that, so I'm just going to merge it.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, that one's done. Next.
Okay, the next one is 3 pull requests masquerading as one. It's one. Yeah. So this is the data collections trilogy. I would very much like for this to be in this spec release because it really tightens up the spec. And I think, honestly, one of the big things in this spec release is tightening up a whole bunch of the stuff inside of it and just being more accurate and more precise. So I would like that to go in. The first 2 of these, they're marked as RFC2, but they are really editorial. It's only the third one that's actually an RFC because it actually concretely says these things should be ordered, which we weren't saying before. Nonetheless, I think we're all on board with what it says anyway, and it already aligns with what GraphQL has done since forever. So it is really, I mean, this really is editorial. So yeah, I just want to say, can this be put on your list of the queue for the July release?
Yes. Okay, I'm making a note to myself of the editorial change that I want to do. I'm gonna mark this one as accepted and then just drop a note to myself. Um, which is the the very, very top part of the GraphQL spec. We have this like block where we describe the fact that we have notations to follow. I think we just are overselling the fact that there are data structures. We've written too much there. So I'm just going to make a note to myself to simplify.
Okay,
Note
yeah.
to Lee, simplify this addition a bit before merge. But the actual meat of the change is great. The data collection
Okay.
section is great.
And to point out as well that this is, of course, 3 pull requests. So there are part 2 and part 3 as well.
Which are the
So they're
rest of
linked in the description of this one.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yep.
So part 2 just basically makes the recommendation that even when we say things are unordered, that doesn't mean you should just return them in a random order each time you return them. And in general, you should try and maintain the order if you can. It's basically, if you've got a good reason not to maintain the order, then, don't bother. But like generally, you should. So this is particularly relevant, I think, for like fields. So fields don't have a defined order in the schema. They do obviously in executable documents, but in the schema itself, I think they don't. But we've always like maintained their order, like it's a semantic order essentially. So this just makes that recommendation. Not specifically for fields, just for everything.
Okay. I'm sure we've talked about this one many times before, but the alternative to this, of course, is to write the spec to say when you are defining your schema, you're using ordered data structures to do so. Instead of saying like
Yeah.
this object type has a set of field definitions, you would say this object type has
Okay.
a list of field definitions or an
So
ordered map.
here's why we can't do that. Enums. Enums in general, you should try and maintain the order of, but for some languages, enums explicitly are not ordered. So we would then, if we put that as it must be ordered, we're
Okay.
then requiring them to use not standard enums.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this is like a general change as well. Like it doesn't just apply to fields, it applies to enums and to, input fields and everything else.
Okay. Agreed. I'm gonna
And then
mark this one as RFC3 just so I don't lose track of it. But that one seems great as is.
Okay. And then the third one actually is a concrete change where we do explicitly change the order of things. For example, we do change it so that a object type is an ordered set of fields to say that the order of that is significant. And I think there's a few changes like that where we are explicitly marking certain parts of the schema as ordered. This one I'm not so worried about actually making into this cut. Like I'm happy for this to go out in the next version. But yeah, it's a nice to have.
Cool. This change is also not that big, so I think it looks like the bulk of this is taking all the places where we say list and we actually meant set because they're unique, and
Yep.
all the places where we imply ordering but we don't explicitly say so,
Yep.
you add ordering.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, input objects are ordered sets, but other things are not ordered.
There is almost certainly a reason for that. But I opened this pull request in November 2023, so I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It might be just that that's the way that regular fields were defined, and so I matched that, but I don't recall.
Unions are also ordered sets.
Yeah, because when you print them in SDL, you need them to be printed the same, or ideally, they should be stable when you introspect them, right?
But that's the number 2 in the trilogy does that, right?
Number 2 is we recommend that you try and keep them ordered as best you can normally. Number
But
3
is
in
there
the
anything
trilogy is
semantic
this
that
is
requires
definitely.
ordering? Like if you printed your union list of union members upside down, should that break the spec or should that break the should? You know, the should is not, you can break the should and you don't lose spec compliance. But
Yeah.
this says it's an ordered set.
Why was it an ordered set? Because it's not 100% necessary that I can remember. I think some of these were just nice to haves. Like if there's no reason that anyone can raise that it shouldn't be ordered, then it should be ordered, essentially. Like what advantage does having a union not be ordered give you? Is there anything that it prevents?
One could always argue a performance benefit that ordering this requires memory allocation to maintain their order, whereas an unordered one does not. And if my particular backend is not in the business of printing introspection and schema, but is in the business of like executing as quickly as possible, then why is it a requirement that I make this ordered when nothing defining its behavior uses the
Yeah.
property of orderedness?
I think if you're executing a GraphQL operation, then those 200 bytes of memory are probably not the biggest problem.
But if you're executing it, then the like, the order of the fields, like the what was it, the first chunk of this actually is correct, right? Interface defines an ordered set of fields. No, even that one. Okay, but the number 3 in the trilogy we might need to look at. I think number 2 in your trilogy captures all the things that you wanted. That number 3 just goes like one step too far, but maybe there's stuff buried in here that is not about defining schema chunks and is more about actually defining like important things where we do implicitly imply ordering. Or maybe these things where we say defines a list actually should just be like defines a set. Um, or something
We'll
like
revisit
that.
this another time.
All right, fair enough. At the very least, parts 1 and 2 of the trilogy are approved, and I will clean them up and merge them.
Okay, perfect. Add a validation rule that operation type exists. Yeah, at the moment you can create a mutation operation against a schema that doesn't have mutations in it. Shouldn't be able to do that. It doesn't fail validation if you only reference the dunder type name field, I think. So essentially this is, something that we didn't have that we should have. It's just a very simple validation. Not actually one of mine, it's someone else's, just representing it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Judging through all the RC2s and making sure that we grab the ones that are ready.
Mhm.
I assume that part of the reason why this was RC2 is because we were waiting for GraphQL.js implementations to land.
We do have one of those now, and it looks like, yes, it's merged on February 26th.
Fantastic. Okay,
It's
I just
essentially a breaking change, so it's going out in V17. Like, it's obviously not a breaking change because no one would have broken this, but like
new validation rules going out in major
Yeah.
versions seems appropriate.
Agreed. Okay. These final two, which I've put 10 minutes each, and I'm going to try and cover in 2 minutes. These are both, well, okay, the first one is a long-standing bug in the spec that I have tried to bring to the working group like a number of times now. And it has, oh, I've linked to the RFC tracker instead of the actual RFC. That's fun. That's not where I expected to go. So Lee, this is one where you need to follow it through with a fine-tooth comb and follow. I've put the spec text in the description of the issue. And at the end of each line, I've put what I believe the current state of things to be, such that you can see where I believe the bug is. Because the last time I tried to represent this, something went a little bit wrong in the description of it, and we landed on the wrong part of the algorithm. And then I was like, oh yeah, you're right, there is no bug here. And then I read it again afterwards and I was like, no, there definitely still is. So this, I believe, is a long-standing bug in the spec that needs to be fixed. Also, it's not a bug in GraphQL.js. Like GraphQL.js doesn't have the behavior that the spec seems to indicate, and hasn't ever. Then the other one is list coercion. And that is just, list coercion is really like vague in the spec. It doesn't really handle it very well when it comes to variables. So I rewrote it to use more of an algorithmic system. And I think I copied it based on how the input objects are handled. Because I mean, lists and input objects are very similar. So essentially, yeah, this is again another two big things. One, it's a clarification via algorithm. And two, it's a complete change to the validation table that factors in variables and the existence of variables and what should happen in the various situations with variables, because we just didn't have that before. Also, thanks to Martin's very tight reading of my changes to address this, I've had to introduce the concept of coerced runtime value, as opposed to just the runtime value, to make it clear that this is the variable values that were provided at runtime and have already gone through coerce variable values. So that definition was added as well.
That makes sense because you have the values that go in as the variable values argument to coerce
Yeah.
variable values, and then you have whatever you call the result of having called that algorithm,
Exactly.
which it makes sense that the result of calling the coerce variable values algorithm would be called coerced runtime value. Great. All right, that last one looks more involved, so I will carefully read it. But the previous one, okay, is maybe like a carefully subtle change, so I'll also read that. Was the method of writing that to like back propagate the logic from GraphQL JS and be like, okay, what actually is happening in GraphQL JS, and let's accurately describe that?
No, it wasn't. It was to fix the spec text, and then it was to ask Yovi, does this match what GraphQL JS does? And Yovi to say, yes, it does. That way we fixed it twice, hopefully. But yeah,
Okay.
Yovi confirms it works correctly. And I also wrote some JavaScript back in the day to see if I could reproduce the issue with GraphQL JS, which I couldn't because it works correctly.
Great. All right, I'll try to do a careful read. Part of the reason why I asked is that GraphQL JS being the reference implementation,
Absolutely.
yeah, we
Yes.
should make sure that the rules of how this is happening line up. It's totally plausible that because enough things have iterated and changed over time that this actually was line by line exactly the same as GraphQL JS many moons ago, and GraphQL JS has moved on and fixed bugs and tweaked things, and the spec text just like never quite updated to match it.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to pay attention to. Like when fixes apply to GraphQL JS, someone else needs to notice it and go, does that need a spec change?
Yep.
Cool. All right.
Um, okay, wow, that was a whirlwind stuff. Thanks y'all for sticking with us. I got my work cut out for me to finalize all of these, but we just merged a good handful of stuff in, so very productive meeting. All
Awesome.
right, thanks y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
See you in a week or two.
Right?
See you then. Bye.